In the shadows of the earliest book of the Bible, tucked away in a few cryptic verses before the story of the Great Flood, lies one of Scripture's most enduring and explosive enigmas. A passage so strange, so unsettling, that centuries of scholars, mystics, and thrill-seekers have wrestled with its meaning. It speaks of a time when the boundaries between worlds seemed to blur, a time when celestial beings descended and interfered in the affairs of humanity, a time that birthed legends and monsters. Genesis chapter 6. Before the deluge that cleansed the world, we are given this startling glimpse into a corrupted earth. Genesis 6, 1-2 and 4. When human beings began to increase in number on the earth and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. The Nephilim. Who were they? The text itself is tantalizingly brief. Were they giants, as tradition often claims? Fallen angels? Angelic human hybrids? Mighty kings who claimed divine status? Or something else entirely, lost to the mists of antediluvian time? This isn't just a theological curiosity. These verses are directly linked to God's devastating judgment, the decision to wipe out almost all life with a global flood. Understanding the Nephilim might be key to understanding the very nature of that ancient cataclysm, and perhaps the ongoing struggle between light and darkness. Today we delve into the heart of this mystery. We'll dissect the controversial text, explore the competing theories, examine evidence from ancient non-biblical sources, and confront the unsettling possibility that our earliest history is far stranger and perhaps far more terrifying than we've ever imagined. Forget Sunday school. This is the forbidden chapter, the truth about the Nephilim. Before we explore the wild theories, let's become textual detectives. What does Genesis 6 actually say? The passage is short, but every phrase is loaded with potential meaning and controversy. Phrase 1, the sons of God, Bene Ha-Elohim. This is the linchpin. Who are these sons of God? The Hebrew phrase Bene Ha-Elohim appears only a few other times in the Old Testament, most notably in the Book of Job, where it clearly refers to angelic beings assembled in God's divine council. This interpretation, that angels descended and intermarried with human women, is the oldest and, for many, the most straightforward reading of the text. It suggests a cosmic rebellion, a breach of the natural order established by God. However, other interpretations exist. Some scholars argue that the sons of God could refer to powerful human rulers, judges, or nobles, perhaps those who claimed divine right to rule, a common practice in the ancient Near East. Still others propose a more theological interpretation. The sons of God were the righteous descendants of Adam's son Seth, while the daughters of humans were the ungodly descendants of Cain. We'll explore these theories in detail later, but the most immediate and perhaps intended reading points towards celestial beings. Phrase 2, the daughters of humans, Benot Ha-Adam. This phrase seems less ambiguous, generally understood to mean mortal women. The contrast is stark, beings associated with the divine realm interacting intimately with beings of the earthly realm. The text highlights their beauty as the catalyst for this interaction, suggesting a transgression driven by lust or desire that crossed a forbidden boundary. Phrase 3, the Nephilim. This is the mystery word. The text simply states, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days. What does it mean? The exact etymology is debated. One common theory connects it to the Hebrew root naphal, meaning to fall. This lends weight to the idea that the Nephilim were the offspring of fallen angels, or perhaps were the fallen ones themselves, beings cast down or associated with ruin. Another interpretation suggests it simply means giants. This is supported by the later use of the term in the Book of Numbers, where the Israelite spies report seeing Nephilim in Canaan, describing them as giants who made the Israelites feel like grasshoppers. The ancient Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, the Septuagint, also translated Nephilim as gigantes, giants. So, were they the offspring, or were they a separate group already present when the sons of God came to the daughters of humans? The grammar is slightly ambiguous, allowing for both interpretations. Phrase 4, heroes of old, men of renown, Hagibarim. The passage concludes by equating the Nephilim, or perhaps their offspring, depending on interpretation, with the Gibarim, the mighty ones, or heroes of old, men of renown. This links the biblical account to a universal motif found in many ancient cultures, a primordial age populated by demigods, superhuman heroes, or legendary warrior kings whose exploits formed the basis of epic myths. Think of the Greek Titans or the heroes of Homer. Genesis seems to acknowledge this concept, but places it within its own theological framework, associating these mighty men with a corrupt origin and divine judgment. Crucially, this entire passage, Genesis 6, 1-4, serves as the direct prelude to God's assessment of humanity's utter wickedness and his decision to bring the flood, Genesis 6, 5-7. The implication is clear. The events described, particularly the mingling of the sons of God and daughters of humans, and the presence or birth of the Nephilim, were a primary catalyst for the corruption that necessitated the deluge. This wasn't just an interesting historical footnote, it was a world-altering catastrophe. These few verses paint a picture of chaos, boundary breaking, and the birth of beings associated with might and renown, but ultimately linked to the wickedness that brought divine wrath upon the world. Now let's explore the dominant theory that has captivated and terrified readers for millennia. This is the interpretation that ignites the imagination and fuels countless debates. It posits that the sons of God were indeed angelic beings who abandoned their heavenly station, descended to earth, and engaged in forbidden relations with human women. As mentioned, the phrase Bene Ha-Elohim most clearly points to angels based on its usage in Job. Proponents argue this is the simplest, most direct reading of Genesis 6. Why would the text introduce ambiguous human lineages, Sethites, right before describing a cataclysm caused by unprecedented wickedness? The transgression seems cosmic in scale, fitting for angelic rebellion rather than just human intermarriage. This interpretation gains significant traction when we look outside the canonical Old Testament, particularly at influential texts like the Book of Enoch. While not considered scripture by most Jewish and Christian traditions, except Ethiopian Orthodoxy, the Book of Enoch was incredibly popular and influential in the centuries leading up to and during the time of Jesus. It was quoted or alluded to in the New Testament, particularly by Jude. Enoch provides a detailed, explosive backstory to Genesis 6. It names the leaders of the rebellious angels, like Azazel and Shemi-Haza, and it describes their descent on Mount Hermon. It explicitly states their motivation was lust for human women. Crucially, Enoch describes the offspring of these unions, and they became pregnant, and they bare great giants, whose height was 3,000 ells, who consumed all the acquisitions of men. And when men could no longer sustain them, the giants turned against them and devoured mankind. Enoch paints a picture of monstrous, cannibalistic giants ravaging the earth. It also adds another layer. The fallen angels taught humanity forbidden knowledge, metallurgy for weapons, sorcery, astrology, cosmetics, further corrupting society and accelerating its path to destruction. New Testament echoes. Passages in the New Testament seem to strongly support this view of imprisoned, rebellious angels. 2 Peter 2, verse 4. For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but sent them to hell, Tartarus, putting them in chains of darkness to be held for judgment. Jude 1, verse 6. And the angels who did not keep their positions of authority, but abandoned their proper dwelling. These he has kept in darkness, bound with everlasting chains for judgment on the great day. Many scholars connect these verses directly to the angelic sin described in Genesis 6 and elaborated upon in Enoch. The transgression was so severe that these specific angels were not just cast out like Satan's legions, but imprisoned in a special abyss, Tartarus, to await final judgment. The implications of this theory. If true, this interpretation paints a terrifying picture. A cosmic breach. Angels violated the fundamental order of creation, blurring the lines between heaven and earth. Genetic corruption. The Nephilim were hybrids, an unnatural mingling that potentially corrupted the human lineage God intended. Some interpretations even suggest this was a satanic attempt to prevent the birth of the promised Messiah through a pure human line. Source of ancient myths. The mighty men of old weren't just kings. They were the supernaturally powerful, often tyrannical offspring of angels, forming the basis for global myths of demigods and giants. Justification for the flood. The flood wasn't just punishment for human sin, but a necessary act of cleansing to eradicate this unnatural hybrid race and the pervasive demonic influence introduced by the fallen angels. This theory resonates deeply with the target audience because it offers a narrative filled with cosmic drama, forbidden knowledge, monstrous beings, and a direct link between the Bible and global mythology. It suggests a hidden layer to reality, a battle fought in the unseen. However, this view faces theological hurdles. Can angels, described as spirits, procreate with humans? Jesus mentions angels neither marry nor are given in marriage, although this refers to angels in heaven and doesn't explicitly forbid physical interaction or manifestation. The idea of physical angelic offspring troubles many theologians. Despite the objections, the fallen angel interpretation remains the most dramatic, influential, and arguably the most textually supported when considering the broader Jewish context, including Enoch and the New Testament allusions. Explanation for the Nephilim enigma.
Faced with the theological difficulties of angels mating with humans, another ancient interpretation arose, particularly favored by some later Jewish sages and early Christian thinkers like Augustine. This view argues for a purely human explanation. The sons of God in this theory are not angels, but the righteous male descendants of Adam and Eve's third son, Seth. Genesis describes Seth's lineage as the one that began to call on the name of the Lord, implying a line of faith. Conversely, the daughters of humans, or sometimes translated daughters of Adam, are interpreted as the ungodly female descendants of Cain, the first murderer, whose lineage is associated with violence, arrogance, and cities built in defiance of God. The transgression, therefore, was not cosmic but social and spiritual, the holy seed, Sethites, intermarrying with the profane seed, Cainites. This mingling led to a breakdown of religious faithfulness and moral integrity. The righteous line was corrupted by the ungodly line through marriage. Explaining the Nephilim and the Gibborim. How does this view explain the Nephilim and the mighty men of old? The Nephilim might be seen not as literal giants or hybrids, but as the powerful, perhaps tyrannical offspring resulting from these unholy unions. Their fall, nafal, could be moral rather than literal descent. The mighty men of old, men of renown, could simply refer to the powerful warriors, rulers, or cultural figures who emerged from this mixed society, famed for their earthly achievements but lacking spiritual grounding. Their renown was worldly, not godly. The strengths of this theory: avoids supernatural biology. It provides a purely human explanation, sidestepping the problematic issue of angel-human procreation. Fits a biblical pattern. The theme of separation between God's faithful people and the surrounding ungodly cultures is recurrent throughout the Old Testament. For example, warnings against intermarriage with Canaanites. Explains the corruption. It offers a plausible reason for the rapid increase in wickedness described immediately before the flood narrative, the loss of the distinct righteous line. The weaknesses and objections. Despite its neatness, the Sethite interpretation faces significant challenges. Sons of God usage. As noted, B'nai Elohim elsewhere consistently refers to angels. Interpreting it as Sethites in this one specific passage seems forced to many scholars. Why wasn't a clearer term like sons of Seth used? Universality of sin. Was the Cainite line exclusively female and the Sethite line exclusively male for this intermarriage to be the sole cause of corruption? And wasn't all humanity, including the Sethites, already prone to sin after the fall? The distinction seems somewhat artificial. Explaining the giants. It struggles to adequately explain the connection to the Nephilim, especially if understood as literal giants, or why the offspring of these particular human marriages would be uniquely mighty compared to others. Severity of judgment. Does simple intermarriage between different human lineages, even godly and ungodly, truly warrant the complete annihilation of the world via a global flood? The punishment seems disproportionate if the crime was merely inappropriate human marriages, compared to the cosmic violation suggested by the angelic theory. While the Sethite interpretation offers a less supernatural and perhaps more theologically comfortable explanation, it arguably requires more interpretive gymnastics with the specific Hebrew terms used in Genesis 6, and doesn't fully capture the sense of profound aberration and cosmic disorder implied by the passage and its immediate link to the flood. It feels like an attempt to domesticate a wild and unsettling text.
There is a third, less common but historically grounded, interpretation that bridges the gap between the purely angelic and purely human views. This theory focuses on the concept of divine kingship prevalent in the ancient Near East, the cultural milieu in which Genesis was written. In many ancient cultures, Egypt, Mesopotamia, kings were often seen as divine representatives, sons of the gods, or even gods themselves. They claimed special lineage, performed priestly functions, and their authority was absolute. In this interpretation, the sons of God are understood as these powerful, often tyrannical, rulers or dynastic lines who claimed divine status. They were not literal angels, but humans who arrogated divinity to themselves. The daughters of humans would then represent the common populace. The transgression described in Genesis 6 is thus seen as the abuse of power by these self-deified rulers. They saw the beauty of common women and simply took them, adding them to their harems regardless of consent or existing marriages. This fits the description. They married any of them they chose. It speaks of unchecked lust fueled by absolute power. Explaining the Nephilim and Gibborim. The Nephilim could refer to these very rulers, the fallen ones,
in the sense of being morally corrupt tyrants, perhaps even known for their imposing stature or military prowess, fitting the giant interpretation loosely. Alternatively, the Nephilim could be the offspring of these unions, establishing powerful dynasties, the mighty men of old, men of renown, whose fame was built on conquest, oppression, and the cult of personality surrounding their supposedly divine fathers. The strengths of this theory. Cultural context. It fits well with the known political and religious ideologies of the ancient Near East. Genesis could be seen as a polemic against this deification of human rulers, grounding true authority in God alone. Explains the violence. This interpretation directly links the sons of God to the rampant violence and corruption mentioned later in Genesis 6. The earth was filled with violence. All flesh had corrupted their way. Tyrannical rulers taking whatever women they desired would certainly lead to societal breakdown, injustice, and violence. Connects to renown. It explains why the offspring, or the figures themselves, were men of renown. They were the powerful kings and warriors whose names and deeds were remembered, though negatively from the biblical perspective. The weaknesses and objections. Sons of God usage. Like the Sethite theory, it struggles with the primary meaning of B'nai Elohim as angelic beings in Job. While kings were sometimes called son of a god metaphorically, the plural usage here fits the divine council imagery better. Why the flood? While tyrannical rulers cause great suffering, would this specific abuse, widespread as it might be, solely justify a global flood any more than other forms of human sin? Doesn't directly explain giants. This theory doesn't inherently explain why the Nephilim would be associated with giant stature unless interpreting mighty men very loosely. The divine kingship theory offers a fascinating lens, rooted in historical context, highlighting the biblical critique of human power aspiring to divinity. It provides a strong explanation for the violence and renown mentioned in the text, but it requires reinterpreting the most natural meaning of sons of God and doesn't fully satisfy the giant aspect associated with the Nephilim tradition. Regardless of which interpretation of Genesis 6 you favor, one element persistently captures the popular imagination: giants. The idea that the Nephilim were beings of immense physical stature is deeply ingrained. But is there any wider context for this? The Bible is far from alone in its tales of giants. Ancient myths from nearly every culture feature primordial races of giants, often depicted as powerful, chaotic beings who existed before or alongside the current order of gods and humans. Greek mythology, the Titans, the Gigantes who warred with the Olympians, and figures like the Cyclops. Norse mythology, the Jotnar, or frost giants, enemies of the Aesir gods. Hindu mythology, Dahilas and Danavas, powerful beings often opposing the Devas, gods. Native American lore. Many tribes have stories of ancient giant races who inhabited the land before humans. This global prevalence of giant myths is striking. Does it point to a shared ancient memory? Perhaps inspired by encounters with large hominids like Gigantopithecus, or discoveries of massive prehistoric animal bones like mammoths or dinosaurs misinterpreted as human giants? Or could these myths, as proponents of the fallen angel theory suggest, be distorted echoes of the actual Nephilim described in Genesis? This fascination with giants bleeds into the realm of pseudoarchaeology. For over a century, sensational claims and doctored photographs have circulated, alleging the discovery of enormous humanoid skeletons, often cited as proof of the Nephilim. It's crucial to approach these claims with extreme skepticism. Overwhelmingly, these discoveries have been proven to be outright hoaxes, often created for competitions, sensational news stories, or internet clicks. Photoshop is the modern tool, but fabricating giant bones has a long history. Misidentified animal bones.
large prehistoric mammals like mammoths, giant sloths, or even dinosaur fossils have been mistaken for human giants. Pathological conditions, rare cases of gigantism in actual humans due to pituitary disorders, can result in unusually large skeletons, but these fall far short of the mythical Nephilim proportions and are medical anomalies, not a separate race. While the idea of discovering giant remains is captivating, no credible, scientifically verified evidence of a prehistoric race of giant humans has ever been found. The archaeological and paleontological record simply doesn't support it. So why does the idea persist? Because giants represent something powerful in the human psyche. They embody untamed power, primordial chaos, the other against which humanity defines itself. They represent the hubris of challenging the divine order. Whether the Nephilim were literal giants or not, their symbolic weight as figures of immense disruptive power is undeniable. They serve as a mythical explanation for the monumental ruins of past civilizations or the seemingly superhuman feats described in legends. The echoes of giants in global myths and the persistence of pseudoarchaeological claims don't prove Genesis 6, but they highlight the deep-seated human fascination with the idea of beings larger than life, a fascination the Nephilim narrative taps into powerfully. We cannot discuss the Nephilim without addressing their immediate context, the Great Flood. Genesis 6 makes the connection explicit. The description of the Nephilim, verses 1 to 4, is immediately followed by God's assessment of humanity's corruption and his decision to cleanse the earth. Genesis 6, verses 5 to 7. The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. The Lord regretted that he had made human beings on the earth, and his heart was deeply troubled. So the Lord said, I will wipe from the face of the earth the human race I have created, and with them the animals, the birds, and the creatures that move along the ground, for I regret that I have made them. If we accept the fallen angel interpretation, the connection is direct and terrifying. The intermingling of angels and humans didn't just lead to individual sins. It led to a fundamental corruption of the created order, a potential contamination of the human lineage itself. The Nephilim, as hybrid offspring, represented an unnatural abomination. The forbidden knowledge imparted by the fallen angels accelerated humanity's descent into violence and depravity. In this view, the flood was not merely a punishment. It was a necessary act of cosmic surgery. It was required to eradicate the Nephilim, to wipe out the unnatural hybrid race, cleanse demonic influence, to remove the pervasive corruption spread by the fallen angels and their teachings, preserve a pure human lineage, to ensure humanity could continue through Noah's family untainted by the angelic interference, allowing for God's ultimate redemptive plan, including the eventual birth of the Messiah, to proceed. Even if we take the Sethite or divine kingship views, the Nephilim narrative still serves as the prime example of the extreme wickedness that provoked the flood. Whether through unholy marriages leading to moral collapse or tyrannical rulers spreading violence, the activities associated with the sons of God and the mighty men symbolize the depth of corruption that made the deluge necessary. The Nephilim stand as the ultimate symbol of the antediluvian world's fatal flaws. Their story, however interpreted, is inextricably linked to the rising waters that would reset creation. But here's one final twist in the Nephilim enigma. Genesis 6:4 contains a cryptic phrase. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward. Afterward. After the flood that supposedly wiped out everything except Noah's family? How could this be? This phrase opens up several unsettling possibilities. Possibility 1. A different kind of giant.
Later in the Old Testament, particularly after the Exodus, the Israelites encounter other giant peoples in the land of Canaan. The spies sent by Moses report seeing Nephilim there, specifically the Anakim, descendants of Anak, who made the Israelites feel like grasshoppers. We also read of figures like Goliath, famously slain by David, Og, king of Bashan, whose bed was enormous, and other Rephaites or Zamzumim, described as tall peoples. Perhaps Nephilim in Genesis 6 refers specifically to the pre-flood angelic hybrids, while the later giants, Anakim, Rephaites, were simply unusually tall human lineages, perhaps sharing some distant genetic connection, or perhaps just metaphorically called Nephilim due to their intimidating size. Possibility 2. A second incursion? Some proponents of the fallen angel theory, drawing on interpretations of Enoch or other texts, speculate that there might have been a second, albeit perhaps smaller scale, incursion of fallen angels after the flood, leading to the reappearance of giant clans like the Anakim. This is highly speculative and not directly supported by the main biblical text. Possibility 3. Lingering genetic traits. Could some recessive genetic trait for giantism have survived the flood through one of Noah's son's wives? This is biologically plausible, but doesn't fully explain the specific tribal associations, Anakim, Rephaites, or the consistent link to Nephilim. Possibility 4. Metaphorical usage. Perhaps the spies in Numbers used the term Nephilim hyperbolically, simply to convey the extreme fear and intimidation they felt when seeing the large inhabitants of Canaan. They were invoking the legendary terror of the pre-flood giants to emphasize the impossibility of conquest. The phrase, "and also afterward," remains deeply puzzling. It suggests that the phenomenon associated with the Nephilim, whatever it was not entirely eradicated by the flood, leaving a lingering shadow of giants and mighty figures in the post-Diluvian world. It adds another layer of complexity to an already baffling story.
So, who were the Nephilim? After sifting through the texts, the theories, and the echoes in myth, can we definitively say? No. The Bible itself remains tantalizingly ambiguous. Was it fallen angels breeding monstrous offspring? Was it the tragic mingling of holy and profane human lines? Was it the hubris of ancient kings claiming godhood? The text allows for multiple readings, and perhaps that ambiguity is part of its enduring power. What we can say is that the story of the Nephilim serves as a potent symbol within the biblical narrative. It represents the danger of crossing boundaries, whether cosmic, heaven-earth, or social, holy, profane. The story warns against forbidden mingling and the chaos that results. The apex of corruption. The Nephilim embody the extreme wickedness and violence that characterized the pre-flood world, justifying God's radical judgment. The origin of myth. The passage offers a potential biblical framework for understanding the widespread ancient myths of demigods, giants, and heroes of old. An enduring enigma. It reminds us that sacred texts can hold deep mysteries, passages whose full meaning may be lost to time, or intentionally veiled. Beyond the specific interpretations, the Nephilim story challenges us. It forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about the nature of evil, the potential for corruption even within the divine or the holy, and the consequences of unchecked power and forbidden desires. It pushes the boundaries of our understanding of the ancient world and the forces, seen and unseen, that may have shaped it. Perhaps the truth of the Nephilim isn't a single, neat answer. Perhaps the truth lies in the questions they force us to ask, the possibilities they open up, and the unsettling realization that the foundations of our world might be built upon stranger, darker, and more mysterious events than we dare to imagine. The Nephilim remain shadows in the dawn of history, giants of Genesis whose true nature continues to elude us, inviting us to keep searching, keep questioning, and keep wondering about the hidden truths buried in our most ancient stories.